Our next topic for discussion is professional practices and ethics. And today we have with us Mr. Steve Chapman and Mr. Arden Farley. So gentlemen, if you'd come and share with us.
Good morning. Good morning. Sure it was working, I'm sorry. On behalf of our superintendent, Mary Beth Jackson, and the school board, I want to thank you for this opportunity of coming and really be able to share with you the code of ethics and some things you can hopefully think about and maybe consider this as a preventive measure, sort of like the vaccine shot. When you take the flu shot, you may not have it, but it's just to prevent it, hopefully down the road. So hopefully today, when I share some things with you today, this will be that vaccine shot in that regard. Each year, many of you may not know, or you may know, that I have to submit a state equity report to the state in regards to the totality of our equity situation in Okaloosa County. Part of that deals with the Title IX, gender equity, simply saying that how we're treating our male and female sports, that we're doing an equitable job in that regard. So I began to think about some things as an equity officer that I have ran across some data and so forth that I'd like to share with you. When it comes to code of ethics, it's always the right time to do the right thing. In the past 20 years, I'm going to share with you some statistics where individuals have lost their teaching certificates because of code of ethics. In Broward County, 699 investigations took place in Broward County. 169 lost their teaching certificates. That means they lost their livelihood. They lost what they went to school for. Escambia County, a little bit closer to home, 159 was investigated. 27 lost their teaching certificates. Santa Rosa County, 48 was investigated and 15 lost their teaching certificates. So here in Okaloosa County, our home, 62 investigations in the past 20 years. 13 have lost their teaching certificates. So with the code of ethics, it's a big deal. And I want to take a few moments to share some pointers on the code of ethics and principles of professional conduct of the education profession in Florida. Most of you have this in your packet. If not, there was black and white copies made as we ran out of these the color copies. But please refer to that. A couple things I want to mention is there's an obligation that we have to our students as educators. One of the things I want to point out is we have to avoid harassment of, embarrassment of, or discrimination against students. And professional concern will always be for the student. Professional concern will always be for the student. We have an obligation to the public to distinguish our views, our personal views from that of the Okaloosa County School District, and we have an obligation to the profession to respect and be fair to our colleagues. So what can we do in order to hopefully avoid some of the complications that we may have working with students? One of the things I want to caution you on and make you aware of is please maintain a professional barrier between you and the students. You are the adult, the teacher, the professional. Act like the expert and not like one of the kids. The kids are experts at pushing our buttons, trying to get us to react in a negative way. And the moment we do is usually the moment that we get a phone call from a parent that's upset. Do not harass students. Respect their differences. What you intend as humor may in fact be cultural bias or harassment. I want all our coaches to keep in mind, and you're doing an awesome job every day. Even when I was in school, I can remember my favorite class, other than lunch period, was PE. So you're doing an awesome job. But I want you to keep something in mind is that there's only one code of ethics that I utilize if I'm investigating an allegation. I use this pamphlet. Now, if a parent complains about a math teacher, a science teacher, a history teacher, cursing, embarrassing, or mistreating their child, it will be investigated. And this is what I'm going to use to guide the investigation. If a parent complains about a coach cursing, embarrassing, mistreating their child, this is what I'm going to use to guide the investigation. What I'm saying to all of us in this room is that there's only one code of ethics. There's not a separate one for coaches, so we all must abide by the same code of ethics. And that is why this training today is vital. Again, it's like a vaccination. It's to prevent future occurrences. There was a story told by a coach who had been coaching for 30 years. And Coach Dennis King said with 30 years of teaching, he realized the importance of mentoring those athletes. He said, I was coached by a World War II guy who did a lot of streaming and such. He said that was a code of manly behavior back then. Now you coach with a little more TLC. If you raise your voice to a kid now, it can be perceived as public embarrassment. Back then it made what we consider a man of you. He said he used to deny his players water during practice because his old coaches thought that he was caving into the weaknesses of the students, the athletes. He said now we know how critically important it is for proper hydration. He said he can remember back in the day when he had to break open the smelling salts for a player who felt kind of woozy. But today we follow concussion protocol. He said the thing that I want to point out most is that most coaches have changed their way of communicating, instructing, and disciplining their students now versus 20 to 30 years ago. Times have certainly changed, but they're still 15, 16, 17-year-old kids. I know they're your athletes, but they're still kids, and you're still their mentor. So to all of our coaches today, thank you for making a difference and investing your time and energy into making our kids great. I have two final quotes I'm going to leave with you before Mr. Farley comes up. It says, the job of an educator is to teach students to see vitality in themselves. And we all need someone who inspires us to do better than we know how. Coaches, thank you so much for the job that you're doing.
That was nice. Thank you, Steve. I might not be all that nice, but that was good. I want to mention something briefly. For those who don't know me, I can't get this retirement thing right. I think I retired a couple of years ago, and I'm back. But the principals reminded me that we're not glad you're back, Farley, but it's all good. I'm here proactively to do a little training. But during the last session, and the state did a good job, but they were mentioning about kids talking to kids and that type of stuff. Let me just share with you one thing. I think a lot of times kids go to another school, oftentimes because they see a better program. And some of these things is that if you're not a good coach, or you abuse your power, and you do some things with some kids you shouldn't do, or you incorrectly talk to parents in the wrong way, that boundary thing that they're talking about, they're going to book up. And I'm telling you that firsthand because I have conducted Title IX investigation with players. And oftentimes what I hear from players is their relationship with that coach. Because if you have a positive relationship with that coach, chances are that person is going to hang with you. I just want to share that. The other thing I want to share, that $5,000 kind of got my attention. That's a lot of money to lose, $5,000. And I know recruitment do take place, and I'm just hoping that everybody heard what that individual said. You cut all that out. You just stop that because it does weaken the program of another school. I often ask principals this question, and I'll ask you. I sometimes ask the principals, do the AD work for you, or do you work for the AD? Why do I ask that? Because in some colleges and some schools, that AD is so powerful, they can damn near do anything they want. And that may be good as far as winning, but I'm concerned if that is abused in any way as far as their power and what do they do. Here's the hierarchy for me. The principal's here, the AD's here, and the coaches is there. The coaches are responsible to that AD. I like what the person said earlier, that as an AD, he was just a football coach concerned about football. I got to share, if you're an AD and you're a football coach, and that's usually the case, I'm hoping that whatever you're doing for that football team, you're doing for your basketball team, you're doing for your soccer team, and you're doing for all the other teams. Because I'm going to tell you something. If you are not, and it gets up to the district office that you're just doing a priority for this and you're forgetting all these other things, that can lead to an investigation. Just a heads up. If you're not looking at all your sports, I think Texas passed a law to say we're going to let anybody be AD. 10 years ago, I visited some attorneys in Atlanta to sit down with them because they want to know, can we write the job description strictly for a football coach? And the answer back then was yes. But now they're trying to revisit that as a heads up because they don't think some of you have all the sports interests in mind. Just a heads up. I came across a quote when you talk about the code of ethics I want you to think about. Because unfortunately, some of our smartest people, some of our sharpest coaches, some of our most intelligent people are getting in trouble with the code of ethics. And that is very bothersome. The quotes say, if you can't change the people, change the people. Let me read that again. If you can't change the people, change the people. We're quickly getting to that area that if we do all this training, you have all these people from the state come in, your AD people over here, I mean your people at the district are working hard, and still we have people who are taking chances and violating our guidelines. When I was listening to the state this morning, I said, everything that they said to you this morning, everything they said is in your code of ethics. Everything they said is in your code of ethics. For example, they mentioned, can you go to schools, that Good Hope example, and can you talk to kids if you go to all the schools? Well, that's in the back of your code of ethics. You say, all of you here exercise the best judgment on behalf of students. That's the code of ethics. That's what you signed up for. You exercise the best judgment on behalf of students. That's your measuring stick. When you're out interacting with students, do you do it on the interests of the student? If you do it on your interest, the school interest, or where you have a better team, you violate the code of ethics. You exercise the best judgment on behalf of students. I like to stop for a second and just kind of read something to you and kind of get your opinion of. Is everybody awake? Everybody going to participate in this exercise? All right? All right. I'm going to read something, and out loud I want to hear you. I want to hear you say, is this a characteristic of a male or a female? You ready on the right? Ready on the left? Some of you look like you're not ready. Are you ready? Okay, here we go. And there's a meaning for this. If I was to say macho, you say what? Male. All right, let's do it again. Some of you didn't say nothing. Macho? Male. All right. Domineering? Oh, y'all asleep. Okay. All right. All right. Excellent shopper? All right. Emotional? Both? Okay. Creative? Financial genius? Big ego? It's a good one with your wife next to you. It'll be interesting. weaker, emotional, possessive, polite, always late, aggressive, sensitive, stupid. All right. The reason I mention that, that's a fun exercise. We can look at it different ways, but when we talk about the code of ethics, we all have to be looking at it the same way. So I would like for you to pull this code of ethics out right now out of your booklet. Let's pull it out. And I want you to take 5 minutes just to read it. Because I tell you, as a former investigator, what I hear most times is, I didn't know I couldn't do that. So just take 5 minutes, and I want you to read the Code of Ethics, and then I'm going to ask you some questions. Just read your Code of Ethics. In the last month, we looked at 2 licensed educators that has 30 years experience in Okaloosa County, and they have violated the Code of Ethics. One individual, after Mr. Chapman investigated him, and we provided him what the law states as far as potential of losing your retirement, that gentleman decided to immediately retire. The other person received disciplinary action. The Code of Ethics is almost like the MasterCard or the American Express card. Don't leave home without it. Don't coach without it. A lot of people forget exactly what it says. A lot of people do not realize when they're flirting with boundaries. They become very close with boundaries. It reminds me of a gentleman who graduated from Fort Walton Beach High School, medical doctor, went to Harvard, and he messed with boundaries and he got disbarred. Now he goes all over the country and he speaks to attorneys, educators, and anybody will listen on how not to flirt with boundaries. I can share with you in my 20 years in Okaloosa County, I have investigated at least 15 or 20 coaches. I got a message the other day about a coach at a school doing inappropriate behavior toward a student. The Bobby Knight days, the Woody Hayes days, those days of getting all up in people's face, hollering and acting a fool are gone. And the reason they're gone is because the Code of Ethics is there. Now what happens sometimes, people do it for so long, they kind of get used to it. They get comfortable with it. And sooner or later, somebody's going to turn you in. Go get your attorney, go get your union rep, get whoever you want. I even let people bring their parents if they choose to do so. But if we find out that you violated the Code of Ethics based on this, we will take action. I don't say this as any pride or anything of that nature, because I did investigation 20 years in the Air Force. But I haven't lost an investigation yet, not one. Steve Chapman is on par to do the same. We are very, very thorough. We'll spend nights, weekends, we'll read all the regulation, we'll confer with Andy Johnson's office, we'll confer with the attorney, we'll confer with everybody before we make sure we release a judgment. But if you violated the Code of Ethics, if you put your hands on folks, some people think that's okay. Now I'm Italian, I guess I touch folks. I'm saying cut all that out. You don't have a right to put your hand on folks. Your coach may have did that to you. That may be how you were coached. But things aren't the same, just like the cell phone ain't the same. Used to be a big bag thing, now it's a little small flip thing. So we have to change with the times, ladies and gentlemen. Let me share, if you cannot manage your emotions, you shouldn't be managing other people's emotions. I'm saying that because in my experience, it's this emotional thing that get people in trouble. Oftentimes I go to football games, I go to basketball games, I go to sports events, and I'm observing because I hear these things from parents and other people, and I like to see for myself. There's a coach many of you know is no longer with us. at one of our schools. He used to just grab people and do his thing and all that kind of stuff. You need to cut all that out. I don't care if your coach did you that way. Get you an attorney. When you put your hand on somebody without their permission, that's battery. You just can't do that. And usually it's when you're trying to discipline somebody, just like teachers. Just like teachers. If you're correcting a student's behavior, you do not have a right to do that AT&T thing and reach out and touch them. Put your hands in your pockets, behind your back, whatever you need to do. You have to treat these students with dignity and respect, because it's a different type of student. I also like to let you know that we don't tolerate no unnecessary behavior from parents. There's some coaches feel like there's no help for parents. That's not true. We investigate parents. I had a situation last week. The parent think that she can come on campus and raise hell and do all kind of things, but when she received that no trespass letter, she was quickly calling the superintendent, see, what can we work out here? And we worked it out. You can bring your baby to school, drop them off. You can't get out the car. You can come pick your baby up. You can't get out the car. The reason I mention that is the guidelines are not just for coaches. It's for everyone. Everybody has to maintain a form of standards. I like the stats that Steve read to you, because if professional practice get involved in you and your certificate, your name and your case is forever on the World Wide Web. I ran Broward County, I think it was like 79 pages. Here's what you get if you Google tonight. If you Google discipline against Florida educators, you go to any county, it's going to bring up the name of the person, you can get a copy of the case, and it's forever on the World Wide Web. Now, why do I share that with you? To let you know the Code of Ethics is very serious. I encourage all of you who may have questions to contact Andy Johnson or Mr. Humphrey. Contact our school board attorney. I know we got some new principals that don't realize what an asset is to call our school board attorney. Call Steve Chapman. Get us a call. We're working for you also. We're not just here to investigate, because it's better if we do something proactively, and I think Mary Beth Jackson has been the leader in this proactive approach. Now, some of you hear me today, you're going to see me again at the beginning of the year, because I'll be coming around again to all the schools talking about some other issues like sending out emails to different people, public information that can come back and be somewhat embarrassing. In conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, let me just share this with you, that all of us are responsible for our own behavior. There's a little point, because we try to teach our students to be responsible. But as adults, we too must be responsible. I'll leave you with this poem on responsibility that simply states, I went to my psychiatrist to be psychoanalyzed, find out why I killed the cat, and blacken my husband's eye. He laid me on a couch to see what he could find, and this is what he dredged up from my subconscious mind. When I was 1, I saw my mommy hit the dolly in the trunk, so if I was naturally, I'm always a drunk. When I was 2, I had this feeling of ambivalence toward my brothers, so if I was naturally, I poisoned all my lovers. When I was 3, I saw my father kiss the maid one day. That's why I suffer from kleptomania. But now I'm happy. The lesson this is taught, that everything I do wrong is someone else's fault. You are responsible for the Code of Ethics. Thank you.
The document that I shared with you, conflict of interest questions and answers, there's attached to the guidelines for second semester eligibility. Had a couple of questions during our first break, and we're not going to go over this whole document, but I want to focus on the very first question where coaches may be a consideration. And it's question number 3. It says, does a conflict of interest exist when the school's coach requires students to purchase their uniforms or shirts from him or her or from a company that he or she benefits from financially? And the answer to that, if an employee owns an interest in a company or is paid a salary or a commission by the company, that for such sales, there is a conflict of interest. Okay, that was kind of common sense, wasn't it? But let's go to this next one. A swimming instructor who is not a school employee but is hired by parents to give students swimming lessons. Now, this could be tennis, it could be baseball batting, it could be anything. A swimming instructor who is not a school employee but is hired by parents to give students swimming lessons is now hired by a school to be the swim coach. Now the coach is an employee of the school district. Is there a conflict of interest if students who are on the school's swim team are also paying for swimming lessons given by the coach? So let's look at that answer, because this is an answer that you hear over and over and over again, and it comes from the Florida Commission of Ethics, okay? Once the swimming instructor is hired by the school as the swim coach, he or she has become a public school coach. Please read the excerpt below for the answer to this question. And again, as you look through this worksheet or question and answer document, you'll see this comes up again and again and again for a multitude of scenarios. A public school teacher or coach is not prohibited from privately tutoring or providing supplemental instruction to public school students or from offering private summer programs to students, provided that the students tutored or instructed or offered the programs are not students in or on the teachers or coaches' classes, group instruction, sports tryouts, sports team, at the time of the tutoring, the instruction are offered. So that basically means that if, and we have many of you that do coaching on the side for pay, as long as there's not an overlap. And again, this is not necessarily coaching and coaching at the school and coaching with a private program, but this is, I'm the science teacher, I'm the band director, I'm an English teacher, and I'm getting money on the side. If there's an overlap, there's a conflict. As long as there's no overlap, and again, there's no overlap in the summer, okay? As long as there's not an overlap, there's a non-issue. We're not going to go over all of these. I've spent more time on it now than I wanted, but you can read, you can look at the scenarios, and these are the answers to these scenarios from the Florida Ethics Commission, okay? So let's look now, for the benefit of our high school coaches that are in here, about this guideline for second semester eligibility status. We're just going to highlight a couple of things in there. Guidelines for second semester eligibility status changes. This is a document sent out by FHSAA in January, this school year. And I'd like to highlight the second paragraph that says, this possible status change, talking about a student moving from eligible to ineligible or ineligible to eligible, is not immediate. There's a waiting period before the status change becomes effective. Bylaw 9.46, if as a result of a first semester grade, a student's eligibility status changes, the student becomes eligible or ineligible on the sixth school day for students of the new semester. Now let's drop down and look at the very bold print where it says, note, the eligibility status change is based on the beginning date of the second semester for students, not the ending date of the first semester. So why is it important for us to be mindful of this policy? We may know the rule, but the way we've been implementing the rule will now change, because you folks know our schedule has been shifted so that first semester ends when Christmas vacation begins. As a consequence, it has extended the eligibility of students by 2 weeks. You follow me? Because their eligibility or ineligibility continues the same way it was at the beginning of first semester until the 6th day of the beginning of second semester. In the past, our first semester ended and second semester began after 2 or 3 days. So now if you have a student, basketball coaches, if you have a student who at the end of the second semester, his grades are making him ineligible, can he play in the Christmas tournament? Say yes, because he is eligible until the 6th day of school beginning second semester. If a youngster was ineligible during the first semester, during the Christmas tournament, he's got good grades. Can he play in the Christmas tournament? His ineligibility extends until the 6th school day of second semester. So the rule hasn't changed, but the way we're going to be dealing with that rule is going to change somewhat. Okay? The last thing that I want to mention to you is just a reminder to our athletic directors in high school is remember that there's a special GPA run for athletic eligibility. And the reason for that is that all of our students that are enrolled in these year-long courses that receive an end-of-year grade and their GPA calculation, even though they get a grade, is not affected. FHSAA regulation says if a student gets a semester grade, it has to be counted, even if you have to use a hand calculator. So we don't have folks using hand calculators. Steve Horton in MIS, after they run the initial wave, he runs a special one for our high school programs. You guys look at that because it includes the grades that there were semester grades for those year-long classes. Any questions? Well, Mr. McGinnis, like I say, has not made it yet, but will be here shortly. So at this time, what we're going to do is we're going to move along with our public relations segment, and Mr. Henry Kelly, who's our Director of Public Communications, if you'll come up.
Okay, well, good morning, and I said this a year ago, and I'll say this again. Mr. Farley may be the most disliked person, so he already slipped down on me, so I was going to use him as a joke, but I offer you the best deal of the day that you will get, and that is that good news comes from the schools, and anytime there's something potentially bad, you just call me up and I deal with it. So there's your public relations deal, is my office is here to help. A couple of quick rules just to keep in mind why sometimes you see things the way they are. We are not allowed to comment on any discipline matters beyond saying it was handled in accordance with school board policy. So be that a student or an educator, any issue that requires student discipline, that's generally kind of our canned answer. One thing that has come up recently is the media, some people's principals have contacted me. Reporters do not have an inherent right to be on your campus or in your practices. They still have to ask for permission, which you guys can decide how much you want to engage them. If they're there to do a good story, something favorable, an athlete received a scholarship, they won an award, great. But if there's issues going on, you can always refer them to me so that I can help you. But keep in mind, there is no requirement to allow them onto your campus or into your practices. It's a matter of decision that you guys are made. Now, social media. Who, raise your hand, has a social media account? Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat. Come on, raise your hands. Okay. With your hands still up, how many of you make comments professionally about something going on in your school, your program? How many of you are comfortable doing that? Okay, a lot fewer hands. And there's a reason I'm asking this, but the last question is, how many times those of you that have social media accounts, have you seen something written about the school, your situation or something, that you want to jump in and set the record straight? You're just all fired up to jump in and say, these are the facts. Okay? But most of you, because believe me, I'm on everybody's, as many Twitter accounts, Facebooks that I can follow, I follow. And the bottom line is, as a district, we do pretty well at resisting the temptation, because believe me, I know the temptation is overwhelming, especially when you know the information. But let's talk about the positive aspects of social media, because it is simply going to be more and more prominent in our lives. When it's done properly, it adds engagement to the parents and to the students and to the school. So it's a sharing of information. We have practice at this time. There's a rain delay. We're not doing this. Sharing of information. And so it's very good in those regards. One of the things that it does that's most powerful is it allows for a fast response. So, hey, a major storm is blowing in. We're not going to have practice today. Okay? Very powerful. However, while it allows for rapid information, the bad news is it allows for rapid information. And when we start trying to use social media to explain a situation is usually when we start to find ourselves in trouble. Mr. Farley mentioned you can go out and Google anything. This Broward County discipline and all that stuff. Once a post is made, especially because we are visible members of the community, it cannot be unmade. I guarantee you I spend half my day when I see posts screenshotting them because somebody said something that they're going to delete and somebody's going to capture it, and we're going to have to be in the position of explaining why somebody said what they said and then why they deleted the post. So, for those of us that grew up, taking shop classes, measure twice, cut once. Before you hit post, make sure you've really read through what you're saying. Because once it's set out there, if it doesn't convey the right thing, if it says the wrong thing, I guarantee you a student or a parent has screenshotted it that fast, and we're going to get an email asking, why does this person think this about a situation? So social media, we as a district have not really decided, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the email threat in a minute, the district stuff, what we share and don't share. It is still, Mr. McGinnis isn't here, but what we share in a crisis or an emergency situation is something we're still working through. Do you guys now know how the daily news and our other media make money? Hits on the website. It's no longer by selling ads in the newspaper. First of all, ask yourself, how many of you still get a subscription to the paper at your house? There you go. Very small. Very few people physically read the news anymore. So the way they make money now is they sell to their advertisers, hey, I get this many clicks per day. Now, the reason this is important to understand, about 2 weeks ago, Google and Facebook account for 85% of the ad revenue sold on the internet. The billions of dollars, 85% of it goes to 2 companies. So what that leaves is a small pool that the Daily News and all these other local periodicals are fighting over, is to get advertisers to advertise on their website. So they're now using a technique called clickbait. And if you're not familiar with clickbait, it is when you see an inflammatory headline that people want to click on to see the article. It doesn't matter whether the article provides any value. It makes you click on their site so that they can add to the number to drive revenues. Because many of you have contacted me and said, I've got this great story. Somebody earned a scholarship. Somebody did this. And believe me, we try to get our local media to run those, and sometimes they do. But if you're wondering why there is a tendency, especially in the last year or two, towards negative headlines, this is why. And believe it or not, there's developed now a whole psychology department about how to write headlines in a way that encourages you to click. For instance, how many of you have seen something like this? The top 7 dangers high school athletes face during practice. Number 5 will shock you. All right, how many of us are going to click on that? More importantly, how many of your athletes' parents are going to click on that? And the answer is a lot. Because, man, that sounds bad. Okay? And then, of course, if you've clicked on it, as I do, you read through it and you're like, okay, this is nonsense. But the content isn't what's important. It's the fact that I clicked on it, and I've now added to that media's click count so they can sell it to their advertisers. So if you're wondering why there's been a shift towards negativity in our local media, understand it's economics. They're trying to figure out how to get new advertisers. And it's all through that clickbait. So this is why when you're contacted by the media, you have to have that little switch in your head that says, does this feel like this is going to be a good, happy article? Like I said, Coach Johnson's sitting there, one of his athletes got a scholarship, and, hey, Coach, we want to write a story. Okay, we're probably on safe ground here. But when you get the call, it says, hey, Coach, we heard one of your students was involved in, that's the moment you should probably stop and direct them towards my office, and we're glad to help. But I want to say something about what we go through in the district office to kind of bring this all in. The email threat of 2 weeks ago now. So we got a call. I got a call about 7, 8 o'clock. I think Andy called me, and we knew we had a problem on our hands, a major problem. And so while we were pulling it together that evening, I was talking to the sheriff's office about what they're going to say. There were a lot of organizations, FBI, FDLE, that suddenly jumped in and got involved. And then we were also like, the person who perpetrated this had sent it to the news media, so we knew it was already out there. It was only a matter of time before that got put out on social media as to what was happening. And we went through, I can't tell you how many people were involved in the conversations, because, of course, when we were starting to get ready to post something, we said, okay, are we going to have after-school activities? Well, the answer was no. But then a few minutes later, somebody pointed out, well, they're having the Relay for Life, which isn't a school activity, but it's on school property. So was that something that needed to be canceled, or how do we address that? So when we started going through, and this was going across every school in the district, the variables that we were taking into account as to what we post. And the reason it took us a little while, which I don't have a problem with, and the reason I'm saying we're so careful on social media was, one of the mistakes is engaging when somebody posts a negative comment or a negative question. And the reason I asked, have you ever felt that urge to really jump in? Well, we were not going to use the district Facebook page to engage in speculation as to what was happening and not happening. So the only post we made was very factual. The schools are open today. You will have excused absences if you want, and go from there. And not when people started, I know it's frustrating. Parents want to know information. I would say most of the people in this room have kids that are in there. So as parents, we want to know these things. But we don't always, the district's challenge and your challenge is, we don't get to be wrong. When we finally put something out, it has to be accurate. And as you guys know, accuracy takes some time. So I promised Andy Johnson I would keep this short and brief. I don't know how to tell you how I told him, I said, I'm not sure how you compress this, but I do see our attorney walking down the stairs, so this is a good cue. But the bottom line is, I'm available. My office is here to help. What we want is the best image for each of the schools and the district. And I always remind people, we're in the best district in Florida, and we always have a positive story. By all means, if you have good stories in your program, send them to me, and I'll help them get distributed. And if you ever have that feeling that, hey, this is something that might be an issue, give me a call, because I can sometimes help navigate it. So with that, since he just got to walk in the door and he's just catching his breath, we had moved the schedule, but Mr. McGinnis, if you're ready, we moved the schedule around. So thank you for your time, and Mr. McGinnis.
Thank you, and I apologize for the delay. The school board sends their greetings, and they're very pleased today that this training is happening, and we appreciate so much all that you do every day in the schools working with our students. Your role with the students is critical to the well-rounded educational experience that we want these kids to have in the Okaloosa County School District. So once again, thank you for what you do. I wanted to talk to you briefly today about the topic of Title IX as it applies to our athletic opportunities in the district, and go through with you just a few components about the Florida Educational Equity Act, which is the state law that implements Title IX in Florida. That act, as adopted by the legislature, is further explained and regulated by the Florida Department of Education under their educational regulations. The basic requirement of the Florida Educational Equity Act is that there shall be no discrimination on the basis of race, ethnicity, national origin, gender, disability, or marital status against any student in this state as they participate in K-12 activities or programs. Certainly that applies then to our athletic programs in the school district. The way in which that's implemented is they have established standards and have defined what it means for us to provide this equal access, equal opportunity in your athletic programs. And the statute goes on to say that a public K-20, because it includes colleges in Florida as well, a public K-20 educational institution which operates or sponsors interscholastic, intercollegiate, club, or intramural athletics shall provide, and these are the key words, equal athletic opportunity for members of both genders. That's the words that we try to help you daily be sure we're following is equal athletic opportunity. The Commissioner of Education in Florida has been charged with the duty by the state legislature to determine whether those equal opportunities are available in the public school districts of the state. So the statute under the Equity Act has created a set of definitions, and I want to give you that definition and then give you the standards that they follow when they look at whether or not we're meeting that requirement. Under the State Board of Education rules, they have defined gender equity in athletics, and it means gender equity in athletics is the fair distribution of overall athletic opportunity and resources substantially proportionate to the enrollment of males and females, so that no student athlete, coach, or athletic administrator is discriminated against in an athletic program on the basis of their gender. So you know that when we look at your numbers annually as a district and you're comparing the enrollment in your school by male and female to the number of athletes that are participating by male and female, that's where this is coming from. It's part of the State Board of Education rule that they're defining gender equity based upon that substantially proportionate number. The rule goes on to say, as it defines accommodation of interest and ability, it says the level of participation for male and female students shall be provided in numbers substantially proportionate to their enrollment in your school. So once again, it's reinforcing that's what they're looking at. And what we have to do when your numbers are not meeting that standard, the rule requires that we will develop a corrective action plan in order to be in compliance with the rule. Now, what the Commissioner of Education looks at in the data and the report that is put together by the district is a series of factors. And these are important to understand because this is what you each, I hope, are familiar with and what you look at across your athletic programs each year. Number one, we have to see if the sports and levels of competition are effectively accommodating the interest and abilities of members of both sexes of the students enrolled in your school. Now, and Mr. Johnson, I don't know if they got in their booklets or not, but there are 3 different ways in which you can measure or report that out to the district, who in turn will report it to the state. One is the participation opportunities for males and females are substantially proportionate to their enrollment in the institution. That just means you're meeting the law clearly without any exceptions or problems. You have to remember, though, there's a change, and this has been in place for several years. There was a time when we would look and say substantially proportionate meant within a 5% range. That's not the standard anymore. Substantially proportionate is now defined as equal representation of female students in your school population. So you don't get the 5% rule anymore in regard to reporting to the state. Now, if you can't meet that standard, a second way we can report your programs is this. If females are underrepresented, the institution can show a history of continuing program expansion. So, if at your school your numbers are not quite meeting the standard, but you can show that there's been a history in your school of expanding the programs, expanding the participation, then if you can document that, then that's another way we can show them how we are trying to meet that standard. And then finally, if you can't meet that standard because you don't have a history of expanding your programs or continuing program expansion, then if you have females underrepresented and there's no history of the expansion, the school can try to demonstrate that all interests and abilities of women are effectively accommodated. So those are the 3 prongs that we're going to have to work with you on, and that we do work with you on, to meet the first element that the Commissioner of Education is reviewing. The second element they look at is equipment and supplies are being provided equitably to both male and female teams. The third area is scheduling of your games and your practice times. Are those being done equally and given equal opportunity between the 2 genders and their teams? Fourth, your travel and per diem allowances. Are you balancing those between the gender teams? Fifth, opportunities to receive coaching. Are those being provided in an equitable manner? You need to be sure that the teams you have out there are all being provided equitable coaching opportunities so those athletes have a chance to enjoy that opportunity. The next one is locker rooms, practice facilities, and competitive facilities. Are those of comparable quality for both male and female teams? And in just a minute, I'm going to review with you a list of areas over the years that we have made corrections and improvements at various schools to let you see exactly what we're talking about in that category. The next item is medical and training facilities and services. Are those equal for both genders and their teams? And then publicity and promotion for both male and female teams. Are you allowing both the male and female teams to have the same access to signage on your campus, to fundraising through advertising, to posting their advertising on your school campus? You got to be sure you're doing the same for both. And then the final item is support services. is your school providing equivalent support services for both male and female teams? Support services would mean, are you providing administrative or secretarial staff or help to coaches? If you are you ensuring that both the male team coaches and the female team coaches get the same access to that type of administrative support service? That's one of the standards. Now, the thing I want to be sure you understand is it's not just a matter of reporting these numbers and then the state looks at them and puts them in a file folder. If you're not meeting the standard, then we have a duty for you to have a corrective action plan. And then again, they monitor those plans. And what I want you to know is that there is a consequence to your school and to this entire school district if we don't maintain the gender equity that's required by law, if we don't maintain corrective action plans that we can show we're making progress on. And I just want you to know the range of things the Commissioner of Education can impose. First thing they can do, if your corrective action plan is not completed or if it's not submitted timely, then they can notify you that particular athletic teams of your school will not be allowed to compete until you get the plan approved. If you have a plan, based upon the severity of the violations you may have, they can designate parts of the school that cannot compete in championship or playoff games. And worse than that, they can identify certain teams or programs you have that can't compete at all until you can get the corrective action plan in place. We don't have anybody that I'm aware of in the history of my time with the district that's ever gotten to that level, but I think it's important just to understand it's very serious and compliance is very important. They can go on beyond that as a state and ultimately can withdraw general revenue funds from the school district if we're not complying, and can cause us to be ineligible to apply for statewide grants that other districts can have. So it's just important to realize that when Andy and his department are pushing you to get the numbers up, to get the things balanced, it's because we have to protect your school and we have to protect the entire school district from ever getting into this category of these type of penalties. Now, what I wanted to provide you with is, I think, more practical information. Now that I've glazed you over with all the legal terms, I want to talk to you about real things that we have had to do over the years in this district to comply with Title IX and with the Florida Equity Act. And I want to review these with you because it's been some time since I've actually worked with the principals and athletic directors to go back and remember a lot of the changes we had to make some years ago when we actually had a federal Title IX lawsuit in this district. So I thought today I might just review with you items we've corrected in the past and hope that you will go back to your schools and just kind of double check things there and be sure that you still have these kind of things in place. Be sure if you don't, that you make provisions to go back and, as you get into the summer months, prepare for the fall seasons, that you make some of these changes or you try to figure out how you're going to do these things. Several areas that we worked on in the past, one is uniforms. In our district, the standard has become and should be that the uniforms for both male and female sports should be comparable in both quality and quantity. Not just one or the other, but both. Also, be sure that as your coaches work with the replacement of uniforms, uniforms for a team of one gender should not be replaced more frequently than uniforms for teams of the other gender in the same sport. This is really important that you keep up with that. So, if your men's basketball team every single year gets all new uniforms, not only new uniforms, but they get new practice uniforms, you better be sure that the girls' basketball program is getting new uniforms And if the boys are getting practice uniforms, the girls need to be getting practice uniforms. So uniforms are important. When we went through this some years ago, the investigators from the Office of Civil Rights that came here had us, and we used a gymnasium here in the district, and we brought and laid out on tables the actual sets of uniforms from every one of the high schools in the district. And they literally went table to table, feeling the quality of the fabric, checking to see if the names and numbers were stitched on or ironed on, and then comparing the male and female uniforms on those standards. That's the level of detail that you need to be watching in your schools with your teams, looking at quantity and quality of uniforms. Another item that came up is if you're going to provide athletic shoes or socks and subsidize those for the players on a team of one gender at your school, then we have to ensure that athletic shoes and socks are provided for an equally equivalent number of athletes on a team of the other gender. So just think about that, because some of these little details you might overlook. And it's not in bad faith, but you're just not going to think about it. But if you're going to go buy a couple of cases of socks for a certain team, then you need to pick out another team of the other gender and be sure they're getting the same thing. Once again, if you're going to provide uniforms that have the participants' names, any logos, or their team names, then you got to be sure you know, are you stitching the stuff on or are you ironing it on? And you've got to be comparable in the way you're doing that for both genders. Another thing I'd like you to be sure you check when you get back to your schools, our weight rooms. We made a commitment that our weight rooms will have dumbbell weights, all of them, will have dumbbell weights in the ranges of 2, 3, 5, 8, and 10 pounds. Be sure your weight rooms have got those kind of pieces of equipment in them. Also, as you schedule your weight rooms, be sure that your schedules show that you're allowing equal time for both male and female teams to use your weight room facilities. That's very important. The other topic, and this is one I know you don't like to deal with, but pregame meals. If you're going to have pregame meals provided to any male athletes, and these are the only exceptions, except if the meals are provided in a private home or funded at another location by those athletes' families, then meals of substantially equivalent quality and frequency are to be provided to a similar number of female athletes. So please be sure, athletic directors and coaches, that you look at any pregame meal opportunities you're providing and be sure you've got those balanced between your male and female teams. But remember, as I said, if the parents are serving the meals in their own home, that's an exception to what we're talking about. Now let's talk about fields and facilities. These are examples, again, from what we've had to do in the past. We made a commitment as a school district that softball fields and baseball fields would be maintained on an equivalent basis. So be certain, if you've got both a baseball and softball field on your property, that you have got grounds crews and other people paying attention to those fields in an equivalent manner. One can't be sitting there fertilized, free of weeds, lushly growing, and the other sitting over there, dirt, weeds, and no one's cut it in 2 months. The maintenance schedule in these fields needs to be equivalent. Also, we need to ensure that softball teams are allowed the same opportunities to sell advertising and have signs and post those on their outfield fences or around their field, just like you would do for your male baseball teams. Bleachers. We need to be ensuring that you have bleachers available at the softball fields to adequately seat the spectators. We're not talking about the bleachers having to be identical in number to bleachers that may be at baseball, but they have got to be adequate to provide seating for those spectators and persons that are coming to your softball games. This can be accommodated by portable bleachers. So if you have bleachers available that can be moved from season to season, that's fine. But you've got to be sure the bleachers are there. Sports drinks. If you're providing sports drinks during competitive or practice times for male teams, be certain you're providing the same sports drinks for your female teams. Awards and ceremonies. If your school provides for a player of the week for some of your male sports, you need to be certain you have a program providing player of the week for some of your female sports. The opportunities for recognition needs to be balanced. Softball fields, again in particular, and these are examples of things we've had to do over the years. If your baseball fields have drinking fountains, your softball field needs to have a drinking fountain. Your softball fields need to have foul poles, and they need to have distance markers on the outfield fences. It's all driven because most of your baseball fields have those same facilities. So just go back and double check and be sure those things are taken care of. Also, if you have a flagpole flying on the baseball field, double check and be sure you've got a flagpole available for a flag to fly at your softball field. I think, Mr. Johnson, that's a good overview then of some practical pointers we wanted to give you today. If you have any questions, I'm sure you weren't able to get that whole list down, but Andy's office, my office, will be happy to go back over any of these items with you. Our effort is to fully support you so that we can comply with the requirements of Title IX and the Educational Equity Act. Any questions? Okay, thank you.
We have two special guests that have traveled long and far from here, all the way from Ruckle, Coach, our athletic director Hedges, and all the way from Baker, our athletic director Coach Brunson. We're going to be here to speak just a little bit about how they do paperwork, just to share their thoughts and ideas. And Coach Brunson, we're going to ask you to go first, and Coach Hedges is going to go second. After Coach Hedges, who's going to involve a little technology, we have Eric Mitchell, who will be here to follow up with a little technology warnings, just like kind of Mr. Farley was doing about staying out of the grass in the deep water. Okay? So, Coach Brunson.
I'm going to do my best to get us back on schedule. Miss Jackson did shoot me a text and make sure she said that the Gillis boys in the back were paying attention. So, Tim, make sure Ryan's paying attention. All right. We don't use a lot of technology just because we do it the old-fashioned way. But real quick, Mr. Humphrey wanted me to share our policies about paperwork at Baker. When your teams are having tryouts, just like the guys from the state said, you had to have all your paperwork in place. So we try to advertise a month in advance and then another round of advertisement 2 weeks in advance via the morning show, announcements at the lunchroom. And we do have our middle school and high school kids all together in lunches so we can get the word out that way. Also, parents meeting. A lot of, in football, we provide notaries at our parents meeting so that we can get the paperwork done there on site. Also, our secretaries in the main office are notaries. Many times the paperwork will come to the main office. They'll have their physical done. The ladies will notarize it, and then they'll bring it over to me. But our policy is this. All right, our coaches are given a spreadsheet, if you will, name, grade, a column for GPA, a date that EL2 was performed, a date for the EL3, and then the MIS 5358 form, which is the county parent permission form. And when they receive that paperwork, they fill in those dates, which helps me tremendously input that information in C2C. But the originals of that paperwork goes in a file in my office. When I was over at Crestview, I did have a secretary, Miss Suggs, did a great job of keeping a master paperwork, file cabinet. Now over at Baker, I handle that, but the coaches help me with it, and we've got a great staff. But in those, we by gender, the males in alphabetical order, each athlete has a file. The females, alphabetical order, each athlete has a file. And that master paperwork copies, or the master paperwork set, stays in my office. And then what the coaches do is they'll check the dates, they'll fill out their spreadsheet, they'll know the kids are ready for tryouts so that they can participate. And then I'll take that spreadsheet along with the other information. Some of the students need the GA4 form, the proof of insurance, and if anybody's on an EL5, the academic contract, so that we can make those kids eligible on the C2C rosters for our high school students. But it's real simple. The coaches will then come in and make a copy of front and back of the physical of the ones that make the team, and also they make a copy of this spreadsheet, the MIS 5358, which has the parent permission form and the proof of insurance and all. And if you've ever rode an ambulance with an athlete, you're going to need their medical history, anything they're allergic to, their contact information, and then in some cases, the insurance information. So it's real simple. They put that in a 3-ring binder and they carry it with them on all road trips. And of course, we have access to it at home. But the main thing, that Mr. Humphrey shared with me is we try not to lose anybody's paperwork. The worst thing happens if a kid plays a sport in the fall, they come back and they're trying out for something in the winter or the spring, and that coach didn't turn in the physical and you're chasing it down. The parents are frustrated because they've went out and paid for the physical, went through the process of getting the paperwork done and notarized, and then we can't produce it. So I think the main thing about that is keep that paperwork locked up securely in one place. As the coaches need copies of that paperwork to take it for travel, make copies, but have a place that your master copies are in one place, and then it goes to the next sport by just way of copying it on a copy machine that's on top of that paperwork. And the other thing he had asked me, we bring all of our athletes in before tryouts, so now that this new EL3 form is out, and show them the concussion video, the heat-related illness video, and the cardiac arrest video. And last year it was kind of problematic because if a student didn't go home and make their own username and password and print out their certificate, you couldn't get proof of it unless you showed it to them together. And as a coach, we printed out our certificate and then had every student athlete sign it on the back. But I think that's the way to go with the videos, is bring your whole team in, everybody that's trying out, so that they can complete the paperwork, show them the video at one time. Then when you send the packet home, they can sign it saying that they've watched the videos, which is now a requirement on the new EL3 form. And that's my part, trying to get us back on schedule, but that's how we handle paperwork at Baker. Thanks.
So I had some visuals to go along, but it doesn't look like that's going to work out. So just to go along with what Coach said, we do a very similar process at Ruckle. We have completely eliminated paper from our process altogether. No coaches in my building handle any paperwork for physicals. No one but our athletic secretary and our office personnel handle paperwork. What we do is we have everything available for our students and our parents online on our website, so that when they come into school, they can have that stuff printed off and turned in all together. What we try to do is we have some people in our office personnel are notaries, so that when they come in, they can complete all of those sections with their physical form from their doctor, have it all notarized, and turn in their packet all together. One of the things that we think is a key for success for us is that we do not let any parents turn in any paperwork into our school that is not 100% complete. So if you have your athletic paperwork and you want to turn in just your EL3 form, well, we don't let you do that. You need to have everything all together. Once that's together, we take it immediately and we give it to one person in our office, and that person is responsible 100% to take the paperwork from there. They scan it into a file. Once they scan it into this file, we've had L3 create a private shared box or drive that our admin team and myself are all shared on. From that drive, we have our athletic secretary put their scanned physical copy on there, and then they rename it with the child's name and the date of the physical. That allows us to know when they expire, as well as what the child's name is, very easy to look up. From there, as an athletic director, my job, and this is something that we're newly implementing this year, is I would then take those names and copy and paste them into each sport with the list that I get from my coach. So here's everybody that wants to try out for football. Well, that didn't work. Here's everybody that wants to try out for soccer. So then I come in and I match up all those names, I copy everybody's physical that I have, and I input them into that. So now my soccer coach knows, okay, here's my 26 girls, 24 of them had their physicals in, these 2 other girls can't try out, they don't have their stuff in. What that does is, I already heard Coach say the worst thing we can do is lose a physical from fall to spring. Well, that's absolutely terrible. We don't ever have it. If we don't let our coaches touch it, nobody can lose it. That's the biggest thing for us. And that's something that we think has really gone above and beyond as far as eliminating problems. Again, the number one thing that we did is we went to L3. We said, what can we do to make this possible? And they created our own drive, and now we put everything on that drive. And the easiest thing to do, scan it, you put it in, you rename it, and it's done. You never have to think about it again until it expires from 6th to 8th grade for us. It'd be different for high school, obviously. Some things that we ran into when we were researching this for everybody in this room is some HIPAA stuff about confidentiality. How do we get it on an ambulance? How do we get it in an emergency situation to emergency personnel? There's 2 things that we were told, as I understand it, is 1, all of that information that your head coach has or your athletic director has must be stored on a district-issued device because of confidentiality agreements. So the easiest thing that we found to do with that is if you have a laptop that you're issued by a district, have it on the sideline, you can pull it up, the emergency personnel can take pictures of the laptop screen or whatever you need, or you can have it in the vehicle with you. If that doesn't work for you, you think it's too bulky, that you don't think that's a possibility, we did a quick breakdown with our Ruckle sports. The most amount of sports we have in a single season is 6 that we would need a device for. We have 18 total sports, so if we needed to purchase 6 cheap iPads, let's say, an iPad's $300. If we had to purchase that, it'd be $100 for each one of our sports. So even that, if you think you got to purchase 6 iPads, it's maybe not so much, and then you can check them out at the beginning. I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought. Am I making any sense? Am I just talking nonsense? All right. Get some iPads. That's what we're going to do. Then they're district issued. Coaches check them out at the beginning of the season. They've got all their physical form paperwork on there. If you got to put a kid in an ambulance, you got to, God forbid, chopper a kid out, they've got all the information. You can get it to them then. What we understood from our EMS personnel when we contacted their department was, get it to us any way you can. Doesn't matter how you get it. Once it's in our hands, they're bound by confidentiality on their end. Unlike some of our coaches or personnel, you can't just take a kid's physical, hand it to not their parent or one of your assistant coaches and put them on a bus. That doesn't always work. But if you give it to emergency personnel, that covers us. I'm sorry, that was very quick. I'm also doing my best to keep us on time. Anybody have any questions? Fantastic. Thanks.
The 2 folks that have spoke previous, both Jeff and, guy was right in front of you. Henry. As the guy that runs between them and you a lot of the times, I can't tell you how important those 2 gentlemen are to us and the district in protecting us, keeping us straight. Jeff has, when I left Bruner to go to my department, I never would have thought I'd known Jeff on a first name basis. I didn't even know who he was. Didn't know we had a school attorney. Now we talk pretty much, not every day, but a lot. He's got resources out there that are tremendously helpful. Now, when you're thinking about going to forms and doing it online or doing it on a server, a couple of things you got to keep in play. First off, HIPAA's still there. Not the school rules, but the medical rules. So the only person that can have access to all the records, whether a kid plays volleyball or football or baseball, when all those records come into that one big folder, that access is extremely limited. Athletic director, principal, assistant principal, and the secretary that puts it in, that's it. As the baseball coach, unless you also coach girls volleyball, you have absolutely no right to see the forms that come in from the doctors on those students. It's need to know, and you don't need to know. And that's why those separations are done that way. That's why the athletic director has to hand out to the coaches those forms that are only pertinent to the students they will have. Okay? That's why that's in place. Now, let's say you're ready to do this. You're ready to set up a scanner, and you want to start putting documents on a server folder electronically. They said they went to L3. That's the exact place we're going to go. But I don't want you to call L3. I want you to call me, or email Dustin Keith. Either one of us. That way we can understand what you're doing and make sure it's done right for you. L3 will get an idea of what you're doing, but they don't necessarily know all the rules and laws you have to follow. We want to make sure that happens and gets taken care of. So that's what that's about. We want to help you with that. So if you want to move to that system, give us a call. We will definitely walk you through that process and get that for you if that's what you want to do. Now, let's talk about the second part of the conversation that Ruckel had, devices. If all you do is take all your electronic forms and put them on a server and print them off and hand them to the coach for the season and go, hey, softball coach, here's your fitness information for your season, that's great. You can do that. You're still dealing with paper and printing, but you've got your forms. That's fine. But if you want to go the next step and put them all on a device, then we get into some more rules. Now, he wasn't expecting this today, but I want Bill to stand up. Okay? If you want to order iPads for your department, go to Bill. Don't go to Best Buy. Don't go to Walmart. Go to Bill. Not only can he get you better pricing, he can get you the devices that you have to have as required by law for this. Go to Bill. If you can't get to Bill, come to me. I'll get you to Bill. We'll take care of you. The more you buy, the cheaper we can get them typically. Second of all, he has to configure the device for documents as a district-owned device. You can't do this on your cell phone. Let me reiterate that. Do not put student information on your personal cell phones. The moment you lose or drop that phone, you, not the district, are liable directly. So don't do that. Put it on an iPad that the district owns. Why? Because I could call Bill right now, tell Bill to erase this iPad, and he could do it from right where he's sitting. It'd be blanked and gone. That's the level of protection that's needed to put that kind of information on these devices. And that's the only way that's possible. Bill can do it. He's got the tools. He's got the skills. We like Bill. Okay? That's why we want to do it that way. So if you want to do the device method, we want to support you 100%. But we got to do it the right way, and we'll help you do that. Last but not least, I hate to bring back old wounds, but several of you were involved with me asking you for data. Public records are public records. If I get a request for public record information, I have to supply that information unless it conflicts with law. And unfortunately, when it's athletic information, very little of that is stored in our system because it's constantly changing. So if I have to come to you as a coach or to you as an athletic director and say, I need this information about your players, it is not because I want to. It is because I'm bound by law to do so, and I don't have that information myself. If I did, I wouldn't bother you for it. I would just do it like it's supposed to be done. I'd definitely tell you about it, but I would try to do it for you. But there's just a few cases where we don't know what kid plays what sport, and sometimes that data is asked for. So when we ask for that, there is a timeline, there is a requirement, and unfortunately, I can't do much about that for you. If I could, I would, I promise. Any other questions about what I just went over? Did I cover what you were expecting?
Sir.
All righty. You guys do a great job. I love every one of y'all.
A lot of our folks come over kind of strong, but that's how intense they are with trying to keep you out of trouble, trying to keep you out of the weeds. And technology, it's an area that I can get over my head and in the weeds in a hurry. So if you're thinking about technology, any of it, other than turning on the television, call Eric or Bill or Dustin, one of those guys, and they can give you some good advice and keep you safe and protected. At this time, Mr. McGinnis, Jay McGinnis, and Nick Kutsarardis are scheduled to talk with us about transportation and weather safety. So, Mr. McGinnis?
Good morning. I'm going to keep this brief. The And there's Mr. Koutsaratis. Would you like to take your place at the podium? What we want to talk about is student activity transportation, and brief, go over this with you. We have 5 categories that you need to be aware of because it's a liability issue, and that's why the district is concerned with it. I'm not going to read all the categories, but the options, the first one is obviously traveling in a school bus with a transportation bus driver that we provide for y'all. That's what the majority of you do. The second one is traveling in a bus with a coach or a person at the school that has a CDL license. That is option 2 that you go to, and many of you do that with the coaches that drive for your activities. Third option is a one-way drop-off to an activity via school bus with one of our drivers. And we only provide this, or we'll let you do this in county, and the reason for that is if you're in Escambia County at a softball game, and the lightning storm comes up, rain, game's canceled 5 minutes after you get there, and we've turned around and come back to Okaloosa County with the bus, then you're stuck there. And you have no way to get home but to put them in cars and things of that nature. So we don't want to leave anyone stranded for something like that out of county where we can't get to y'all in a relatively short time. Fourth option, transporting students in privately owned vehicles to or from an event with written parent permission. And that strictly talks about parents driving kids to things, but they can do it with written permission and the right license checks and things of that nature so that they have, the liability to cover them as far as an accident or something like that. The next one is traveling in vehicles leased by the district. You can do that, but you must make sure that that vehicle, if you're going to lease it, is something that is on the Federal Motor Vehicle Safety Standards list that is provided. And we are fixing to get that upgraded through our risk management office, or updated, excuse me, and I can make that available to all of y'all for all the vehicles that are vehicles that you can technically use to drive students to an activity. One other quick thing before any questions on the options that any of you have or have experienced any problems in this first year that we've been doing this? Does everybody understand the options? Okay. On another note, as of May 1st, all coaches or teachers or employees that hold a CDL license have to have a DOT physical now instead of a DOE physical. It's the new federal law that Florida has adopted. The two big things that are different, just to quickly tell you, the DOT physical is good for 2 years now instead of 1 like you have. And it has to be performed by a DOT physician. So you can't just go to any doctor anymore and get a physical to drive a bus. We will provide you with a list of DOT certified physicians in the area, and then you can choose which one of those you'd like to go to. So those are the two main things, the difference in the DOE and the DOT. We have a new safety trainer, CDL person in transportation. Many of you are familiar with Sherry Curtis, who was there for many years. Sherry is retired now. Her replacement's name is Tim Duffy. He was a bus driver and a trainer for us in the Crestview area for many years, and now he's taken over for Ms. Curtis. He's still in her office that she had in Fort Walton. The number is 833-6363, same as Sherry Curtis had. If y'all want to contact Mr. Duffy about coaches getting trained or people at your school being trained. I know he's got an in-service plan this summer for coaches and or teachers at Shoal River, I believe, on June the 6th, if I'm not mistaken. Tim will work with you, though, at the schools, whether you principals need people trained or athletic directors want somebody trained. Give myself or Mr. Duffy a call. We know y'all's schedules are very, very tight, so we can be flexible with how we set the training up for you. And we just want to make sure that we're doing whatever we can to help you guys at your level with the transportation piece. Any questions? Mr. Koutsaratis?
Thank you. Just want to reiterate back to the technical assistance paper there that Jay was referencing. Everyone should have at least your athletic director, and we'll have the technical assistance paper. So if any of you coaches need that, it's just a step-by-step. We put it together. It took several months with Jay and myself and Jeff McGinnis, our attorney, trying to minimize the liability for individual coaches in the district to make sure that we're doing things the right way. And so we've tried to think of everything, and I know there are situations that come up, and it doesn't fit into any of these categories. So when that happens, give Brian Humphrey a call, and if he can answer the question, he will. Oftentimes he comes to me, and we conference together or call Mr. McGinnis, and we'll figure out the answer. So don't hesitate to give us a call if you have any questions. The other thing is, I think an easy way to save money at your schools and your athletic programs is to have your coaches trained to drive a bus. It's a huge savings for any of your programs, especially the sports that don't generate much revenue. And so that would be my suggestion. Y'all do what you want, but if I'm a coach and I can and am physically able to drive a bus, then I think that's an easy way for me to save money for my program. Okay, so changing gears to the WeatherBug. We haven't installed it yet, but we have a WeatherBug system. It's a lightning detection system that will be installed in every middle and high school in Okaloosa County. And what this is, it's connected to the internet, and it will it will notify us by a flashing light and a siren if there's lightning detected in the area. And so what we're going to do is get with some experts and determine what the range, how far out we want it to detect, because it's adjustable. We can adjust it for 5 miles, 10 miles, and so whatever is the proper, I think 10 is about what we would say is safe. And it will, if it detects lightning within that 10-mile radius, that siren's going to go off. And we will be able to turn it off at 3 a.m. We'll have the active time, so it's not alerting the neighbors at a 3 a.m. Thunderstorm. But what it is going to do, it's going to take away the guesswork. And so if you're out there and the siren goes off, you got to get off the field. And so I've been there as a coach. You know, I got 10 minutes left in practice, and I'm looking around, and you know, one of the kids goes, "Hey, coach, there's lightning. Did you see that lightning?" "No, son, I didn't see that lightning." "Hey, let's do it. Let's run another play." So what we can't do is we can't do that. And so when it goes off, that eliminates that judgment call. We got to come off the field. And so that's whether it's a practice, a game, a graduation. I know at Niceville's graduation last year, we had a lightning storm. That would take all the guesswork out of it. And one of the interesting things, we will train athletic directors and coaches and secretaries at the schools. One of the cool things about this program, you can install an app, download an app on your phone, and what will happen is the siren goes off. You got 30 minutes. If there's no lightning detected in the next 30 minutes, it's safe to go back on the field. And so you can download the app. When it goes off, open up the app, and it'll have you a countdown. So in fact, every person in the stands could have that app downloaded and be watching the countdown. You know, and it's going to count down from 30 down to 0. If there's another lightning strike, it goes back to 30. So you could be there for hours and not be able to get back on the field. So that's when the administrator, the coach, is going to have to decide, hey, am I going to cancel this practice? Am I going to cancel the game, postpone it? That'll be the administrative call at that point. But that's coming. They're not installed yet, but they will be installed in every middle and high school in our district. Okay. Jeff, anything to add there? Okay. All right. So that's my part.
At this time, we're going to invite a couple of representatives from Andrews Institute. Administrator at Andrews Institute, Bo Pollard, is here. We also, raise your hand there, Bo. You're not coming up to the mic, are you? And then we have Dr. Mike Milligan, who's sports medicine physician there at Andrews Institute. They're going to be covering the concussion, the heat, and sudden cardiac arrest issues that are now so important in our FHSAA documents and protocol. I'll share with you this, that the current FHSAA protocol dealing with concussion injury and phasing students or athletes back into your program came out of the work at Andrews Institute. So they're very much aware of what this is because they were part of the development of it. But this time, Dr. Milligan.
Thanks for having us here today. I was asked to come speak today to you guys and was given some topics specifically that the administrators want us to talk about. And so we appreciate the invitation. Here today on behalf of the Florida High School Athletic Association and the Andrews Institute, the opportunity to talk to you guys. I really wanted to start by introducing myself because I understand sort of who's the guy in front of the room. That really makes a difference in the message. And so the things I'm going to tell you about myself aren't self-congratulatory, but to let you know who I am and who this guy is in front of you. So I'm from I claim a little town called Whiteville, North Carolina, a little town of 5,000. Just for that. But really, I grew up between two tobacco fields about 3 miles outside of town. And so that's where I was born and raised, and I attended the school, a little small high school there. Graduating class was a little less than 200. That's where I played football, and that was where I got my start. And this guy right here, his name's Linwood Hedgepeth. He's like, all of you in the room here. He's my first high school football coach, and he's the reason I'm standing here in front of you today. He was the guy who took me under his wing as a freshman in high school, and he said, hey, here's the route you take if you want to get a college scholarship, play football. Here's the route you take if you want to become a physician. And he was the first person I ever looked at me and said, you can be a physician, you can be a doctor, you can do what you want to do. And I still remember that conversation sitting in his pickup truck. So everybody in this room is having an impact whether you realize it or not. And when I stand here in front of you, I understand that. So I had the opportunity to play football at Presbyterian College, got a good education, got to play a little more. Went on to medical school, residency at East Carolina University, practiced in Eastern North Carolina for a while, and then went out to Las Vegas for my additional training in sports medicine, where I eventually became the head team physician. And so between UNLV, University of Nevada, Las Vegas Rebels, and Northwestern University and the Big Ten Conference in Chicago, I spent the last decade before I came down here running Division I athletic programs. And in addition to that, taking care of athletes at every level besides just Division I. So I think I've been around sports a little bit. I think I understand a little bit. And I think I have a little bit of vantage point on the perspective of the folks in this room. And now I have the opportunity to be here at the Andrews Institute over in Gulf Breeze, Pensacola, taking care of patients there, high school athletes, regular folks with regular problems, grandma with arthritis, so sort of see a little bit of everything. But my interest and passion is sports medicine and all facets of that. And so with that introduction, I was asked today to talk about 3 topics. Sudden cardiac arrest, so cardiac issues in athletes, heat illness, heat injury issues, and then that topic I can never get away from no matter where I go, concussions. And so we're going to start with a little bit of data. And now you'll notice in this first data here, it says NCAA sudden death statistics. And the reason is quite honestly, it's a lot harder to get hold of high school data. The NCAA has done a little bit better job of tracking. They haven't done a great job. We've done a little bit better job. So this is a pie chart that for me as a sports doc, I see this thing all the time. And you'll notice that over 50% of that chart is accidents. It has nothing really to do with sports and the stuff we all do every day on the field, either you guys do every day on the fields and the courts and what have you. But obviously you have an opportunity to impact your students, your student athletes in that regard as well. In regards to the topics we're talking about today, this is why those 2 topics get so much attention, because 17% of deaths are cardiac and heat. A study with a little more relevance, and I realize this is football, so it doesn't apply to everybody in the room, but again, we take the data we can get a hold of. 20 years of data looking at high school and college football athletes. For 20 years, across the country, 243 reported deaths over 20 years. Many of those were what we call indirect issues, so illnesses, infections, those types of things. Direct is traumatic, right? One guy hits another guy and you get an injury there. And the second part of the slide there, looking at college versus high school, you'll notice in virtually every category except the one in red down at the bottom there, things are worse off at the collegiate level than the high school level. Okay? But in one area, universities have done better, and that's brain injuries. And then we look at fatalities, which is really what we're talking about and most concerned about. Again, it brings us back to our topics that we're talking about today. So cardiac events remain the number one cause of death in athletes at this level. And cardiac injuries also include this condition called commotio cordis, which we'll talk about as we go through the talk. And then we have heat illness and brain injury. So those conditions, 85%. And so that's, again, why those topics are the ones that we're talking about. So sudden cardiac arrest, sudden cardiac death is the leading cause of death in young athletes. It's predominantly males, so males more than females. Blacks, African Americans, for reasons that maybe are beyond the scope of this talk, are more common than non-blacks. Football and basketball. When I say basketball, that's men's and women's. Okay, so football and basketball together make up 2/3 of deaths from sudden cardiac arrest, sudden cardiac death. Equates out to one death every 3 days across this country. And there are your statistics for high school athletes there. So we look at it in these terms. Obviously, the numbers aren't enormous, but when we're talking about percentage of deaths, it's still an important player. This is a very busy slide that I took from NCAA data. Again, realizing college versus high school. A couple things I want to point out, though. Again, it points out males roughly 2 to 3 times the frequency of females. The risk for a black athlete, 1 in 17,000 versus a non-black athlete, 1 in 58,000. And then we look at this in terms of sports. Basketball is our number one risk sport for sudden cardiac arrest, males or females. African Americans get at more risk. And then football is down here for those wandering across country and the like. But basketball remains our number one risk. So when we talk about sudden cardiac arrest, sudden cardiac death, there's some warning symptoms that we always got to have our ears perked up for. That picture there is Hank Gathers, for those who may remember. Some may be too young for that. If you don't remember, Google, watch the videos of his last college basketball play. One of the gentlemen on the court here, I won't point him out, but I had the opportunity to be close friends with him, and he was sitting in the stands when Hank Gathers collapsed. And he can talking with him about his experience just reminds you of why it's important. So exertional chest pain, exertional syncope. So syncope is loss of consciousness, passing out. Okay, so unexplained seizures. So lots of times folks will collapse, whether it's a cardiac event, a heat illness, a concussion. A lot of those different things will have twitching movements or what have you that can be confused for a seizure. So when you see what you think might be a seizure, be mindful it could be another condition. Excessive shortness of breath, disproportionate fatigue, irregular heartbeats. Hank Gathers had all of those prior to his death, and they really actually kind of knew what was going on there, and that's a conversation for another day. But those are warning symptoms we have to be mindful of. So as athletic trainers, as physicians, when we see athletes and we're hearing those types of symptoms, we perk our ears up and say we've got to investigate that a little further. For you as coaches, where you may or may not have all those supporting folks right there immediately available to you, those are things just to be aware of. I don't expect you to read all of this on here. I don't expect you to know any of those things, but this here is considered the standard of care in the United States for evaluating an athlete for cardiac risk before participation in sports. The key piece of this is it's a defined medical history and a medical exam performed by an individual who has the right training and experience. In addition to this, there's certainly instances where we'll do other testing, EKGs, echocardiograms, those things. But the standard of care is this 14-point exam right here, which consists of questions and a physical. So when you see an athlete and you recognize that they may be having a cardiac event, that they've collapsed or unresponsive, maybe they're having those seizure movements that we mentioned earlier. First thing you got to think when that athlete goes down is it's a cardiac event till proven otherwise. Okay? So when I when I see that, and we go to the next slide in a minute, when I go out on the field, the first thing I look for is that defibrillator. Okay, so I'm covering an event, I'm covering baseball game this weekend. First thing I do when I show up after I shake the athletic trainer's hand is I say, where's that defibrillator at? I was standing on Division I sidelines. My athletic trainers were out there. I walked out there to say, where was it? And they knew they better be able to point it out to me real quick. So I strongly recommend for you to know where yours are. CPR, I presume most folks in the room are trained in that. If you're not, I strongly suggest you get trained. That's the number one thing you can do to save your athlete. And put that AED on once you get it. The great thing about AED is you slap those patches on, and it's going to record that heart rhythm, and it's going to give you a verbal right there on the spot if there's an abnormal rhythm, a lack of rhythm, those types of things. So combining CPR with your application of AED, you can do a lot quickly for your athlete. Why is being prepared and knowing where your AED is at, having CPR training important? The statistics are right there in front of you. Survival after collapse from a cardiac event is declines by 7 to 10% per minute. So within 10 to 15 minutes, your chances of saving that athlete are basically gone. Okay? So the person standing there at the time is the person who has the best shot. If you apply CPR, survival improves. So you don't have an AED, start giving chest compression, start giving breaths. You can extend the opportunity to save that athlete. So have an emergency action plan is something that everyone should have, obviously at all their venues, whether it's where you lift weights, where you practice, where you play at. Having CPR trained individuals there and having a defibrillator, those are the things most important, saving your athletes from a cardiac event. American Heart Association clearly defines some recommendations there on what you should do to be prepared. Number one is have a plan in place to call when there's an emergency. So whether it's calling 911, whether it's activating your campus system, depending on where you are, getting your bystanders involved. So for those of you coaching, we have a coaching staff. Your group of coaches, you got to have a plan. Everybody's got a role there if an athlete goes down. Applying defibrillation early with an AED and applying CPR quickly are obviously very important. And then getting your experts, your EMS crews and whatnot involved to assist and care of that athlete. Another condition I mentioned earlier, we saw on that slide at the very beginning there, 2.9% of deaths in football have been related to this condition called commotion cordis. Another name for it is a cardiac concussion. Most injuries from this condition are actually a ball, a baseball, a softball, a hockey puck, what have you, hitting an athlete in the chest. This is a very real condition. I've had colleagues who've dealt with this. It's typically a younger athlete. It's most commonly a male. It's usually an athlete under the age of about 14 or 15. Takes a hit to the chest. The classic example is much like this picture here. The athlete gets hit in the chest there. They'll often take the hit, rebound back a little bit, take a few steps around the mound. They'll look like they're shaking it off, and then they collapse. When that happens, AED, then out on the field, not the other way around. If you see that hit in the chest and they go down, grab that AED on the way out there. Your window is very, very short for saving that athlete. Survival rates, 16%. Add an AED, 46%. Grab the AED, then go out there. That's why it's important. You got to be prepared. You got to think about it before it ever happens, because you get one chance. Your career, if you see one, you'll probably only see one. And you're the person who's going to have that chance to save that athlete's life. Changing gears, heat illness. So we talk about heat illness, we're really talking about two conditions today, heat exhaustion and heat stroke. Heat exhaustion, one we're all familiar with, we've all probably experienced at least once or twice living down here or in the south, anywhere that many of us live. This is less severe illness, right? You get hot, you don't feel good, you can't keep exercising as hard as you were. It occurs when you're working at a hard level. It usually happens in hot conditions. The South obviously is notorious because we got heat and humidity. And those athletes tend to recover well. They take a little break, they get a little cold dumped on top of their head, they get a little water break, those kind of things, they'll hopefully usually rebound. In some cases, it can be a bit more debilitating, and it's hard for them to recover for the rest of practice. Then there's this other condition called heat stroke. Why is that important? Well, it's a medical emergency. So in medicine, we talk about medical emergencies. There's a pretty short list of those, and this is one of them. What happens? First, two things happen. We have brain dysfunction, so CNS dysfunction, central nervous system dysfunction, or brain dysfunction, and we have organ failure. Those things kill. Those key things cause permanent harm. Delay in treatment leads to death. So when you recognize it, when you think about it, you got to act on it. And what's the treatment? It's immediate cooling. Okay? So you got to get the athlete cooled off. Cool the patient first, transport him second. You'll hear that again because that's important. So heat exhaustion. So heat exhaustion, kind of the difference between that and heat stroke, one of the key differences is body temperature. So core body temperature. Most of you aren't going to have the ability to measure core body temperature where you're at because that requires, in most cases, a rectal thermometer or some other type of internal thermometer. So you're not going to have that. I hear some laughs. It's funny, but I'll tell you that standing on Division I sideline in August for football, we've got it sitting there. We've got a plan in place to do it, and we've done it. And we save lives. And I've also seen athletes who are no longer academically successful as they were no longer playing sports, who are highly successful Division I athletes. So it seems funny. We get some laughs about it, but it's important. Heat exhaustion, this athlete's going to typically recover. You know, this guy here is probably a pretty good example of that. These athletes are going to feel dizzy. They're going to feel lightheaded. They don't want to continue going. They may have headaches, nausea. They may have clammy skin. You know, it's hot. They're sweating, and they got that cool, clammy skin that you've seen. So that's heat exhaustion. It comes in severities and degrees, and some of those will recover and come back to practice the same day. Some of them are going to take a few days before they feel better. And then we have heat stroke. One of the big differentiating factors is core body temperatures we already talked about. It's got to be over 104 usually. Can you have a temperature of 104 core temperature and not have heat stroke? You can. So it's not just the temperature. It's also the other pieces. So CNS, that central nervous system piece I mentioned earlier. So what are you going to see? Some of the same symptoms you saw before, so it's hard to differentiate, right? They're dizzy, they don't feel right, they act a little off. When do you start noticing? Well, when they start really acting funny, they start becoming very emotionally labile, as we call it. So their mood is very different. They're asking questions that just don't make sense. They just don't look right. They're staggering. In bad cases, they lose consciousness or they do have seizures. Other things you might see, they may be weak. We've been taught in the past, when I was growing up, you couldn't have heat stroke if you're still sweating. Well, that's not true. Okay? You can still be sweating, you can still be trying to cool yourself and actually be having heat stroke. So wait until you see an athlete that has dry skin to decide to have heat stroke is a fallacy. Their blood pressure may be low, they may be hyperventilating, they may have vomiting or diarrhea. So it's really hard to differentiate these, but you got to just keep an eye on these athletes, monitor them. You know, when you're in those situations, you got to be prepared. Prevention is the number one thing you can do. It starts with your sports physical. By the history you take, athletes who've had previous heat illness or heat stroke are much more prone to future heat illness or heat stroke. Medications and supplements are a big issue. There's some medications that athletes will be on that in and of themselves will predispose to heat illness. Supplements are a huge issue, okay? In this room, many of you have athletes who are using supplements. Some of you may talk to your athletes about supplements. You just got to be aware that some of those can cause issues. And you can't look at the label and know which ones they are. So if you're having an athlete who's struggling and they haven't before, one of the first things I ask them is, are you taking anything? You know, you're not going to get in trouble for taking it, tell me what it is so we can figure out if that's a contributor. The acclimatization period that we all have, especially for football, but we have in all of our sports, is very important. Be cautious with athletes you have coming in who've been sick, okay? Especially during times of year like the summer and the early fall when we're out there practicing. An athlete who's been sick or ill, cough, cold, bronchitis, whatever it is, those athletes are much more prone to heat illness, heat stroke. they're not going to tolerate the heat as well. Their internal body thermometer is off because of that illness. Seen many athletes collapse over time with heat illness from who've never had problems before because they were recently ill. And then educating your athletes. You know, you see the picture here on the right, they've got the fans, they've got ice, they're dumping water on their heads, they're cooling themselves off. Got to prevent it, right? And then what is heat illness and heat stroke? At the end of the day, it's a problem of getting rid of that heat. So because we live in the South and it's hot and humid, you can sweat a lot, but it's not evaporating, it's not cooling you off. If you've ever lived in the Southwest in the desert, you know what that's like. You go out there and you come home from a run in the middle of summer and your shirt's completely dry because that sweat evaporates right away and it's cooling you off. We don't have that ability here. So how do we take care of these athletes? Well, we got to have an emergency action plan. If you have the ability, you have a plan for core body temperature measurement. If you don't, you at least have one of these things over here on the right-hand side, a big bucket of ice water or cold water or whatever you can get. And those are the most important pieces. Now, after you have someone who's had heat illness, it's going to be a slow return to play usually. They're just not going to tolerate practice as well. They're not going to have their legs under them. They're going to be sort of kind of have jelly legs, all those kind of things. If they end up in a hospital with heat stroke, it's probably going to be quite a while. Depends on what type of organ issues they have. And then again, if you see this issue, you think it could be heat illness, cool first, transport second. I can tell you some universities now are actually preemptively cooling guys. I know one university that in August, September, October, some of those games when it's still hot and humid out, they'll bring them in at halftime, the football team, and they'll put them in these. So the coaches come to the athletes, they put them in there. They're actually showing increases in performance in the second half of games because they're getting these guys cooled off back to a normal body temperature. So it's an interesting thing to think about. Just this is a slide we use with our physicians talking about the differences in cooling. There used to be this myth out there that if you took a hot athlete and you put them in a bucket of ice water and make them hotter and make their heat stroke worse. Well, that just doesn't make sense if you ever jumped in a cold bucket of water. But they had to do the studies to prove that because folks thought otherwise. The NATA put together a piece several years ago now that you can have in your manuals and whatnot, and have your student athletes sign talking about authorization for measuring core body temperature. So for places that want to look at this or have had issues, you actually have a way to, it's already been vetted out to establish a protocol there. And then the final topic we got to talk about today is concussions. And I saved it for last for two reasons. One, as I mentioned earlier, I get asked about this all the time, and I think it's an important topic, but I don't think it's the most important. And why don't I think it's the most important? Because it's nowhere on that pie chart we talked about earlier. Okay? But concussions obviously are important. It's something we're all facing and we're having to deal with. As Coach mentioned earlier in his talk, back when I played football, I don't remember anyone ever being held out with a concussion. Of course, I probably don't remember much in my high school career and my college career at that too, but it all worked out okay. So I saw this slide here. I don't know if you can read it from where you are, but sometimes I feel like that's where we're going with this topic. It says 2 players collide, airbags inflate, and another soccer tragedy is averted. But obviously with all the joking, the laughing, sort of those kind of things, trying to minimize it, concussions are a real problem. Okay, they're impacting our sports at every level. It's not going away. The NFL is writing a check for $1 billion. The NCAA is writing a check for, I think it's like $750 million or something like that. You don't write those checks if there's not a real issue we've got to deal with. So we want to make sure we talk about it and try to cover some of the basics for you. So what is a concussion? There's about 45 different medical organizations out there that have their own definitions of a concussion, their own sort of position statements, as we call them. Simplifying it down, concussion is a brain injury. We don't fully understand that yet. Okay, tell me what happens in your body that is not impacted by brain function, and I'll tell you what concussion can't be. Okay, so concussion very simply is a brain injury. It disrupts any function of your brain. So any area of your body, any area of your life that is impacted by your brain can be impacted by a concussion. What are the symptoms? Well, it's really changed a lot over the last decade or so how we think about concussion. We now think about it in terms of various domains. There's a physical domain, so there's some of the symptoms we can have. It's a short list. Common ones that you're going to see, you have seen, if you think about things like having a headache, having dizziness, being nauseous, feeling unsteady on your feet, lights and sounds bothering you, okay, what we call photo and photosensitivity. So those are some common symptoms. Cognitive impairment, so our ability to think and concentrate can be impaired. So some common symptoms that athletes will report, and they won't often say it until you ask them specifically, but you say, do you feel foggy? And they'll go, yeah, it just doesn't feel right. They'll kind of reach out. Do they feel slowed down in the classroom or looking at plays? If you're diagramming a play on the board or explaining something, they can't concentrate on as well. Forgetfulness, confusion, slowness of response. So you're interacting with this athlete on the sideline or in practice, and you know your athlete's probably better than anybody, and they're just not responding and interacting with you in that normal way. Those are things to be aware of. Then there's the emotional presentation of concussions. So irritability, sadness, nervousness. Now obviously these aren't very specific. A lot of different things can cause this. And if you're taking care of middle school and high school athletes, or even college athletes, professional athletes, most of them are irritable, moody, and hard to get along with anyway. So you kind of got to take all that with a grain of salt, right? There are things to be aware of, and you know that difference, right? You know these athletes, and more times than not, you can say, yeah, he's a challenge, but this is a little different. And sleep impairment, one that's often not recognized, but a lot of these athletes will have issues with sleep. They'll have problems with insomnia, frequently waking up at night, or being excessively sleepy. For a 16-year-old, excessively sleepy, he's got to be probably more than 15 hours a day, I guess, but it happens. So we look at concussion in terms of various categories there. All right, so got this next slide, hoping that'll wake up a few people in the room, but there's a point there. Why does he have a mouse on the screen? And that's because a lot of the data we have, a lot of the studies that have been done that have got us to where we are in 2016 have to do with these little varmints. And so I didn't put the pictures of the actual research studies because kind of gruesome. But mice have been really an integral part of our research on concussions. And this slide in particular that came from study of the brains of mice and what happens to the chemicals within the brain after a head injury has really served as the basis for a lot of what we have now. So this slide here shows various chemicals, calcium, sugar, glucose, lactic acid, potassium, and how those change after a head injury. Okay? And what's the key point here? If you look at the bottom here and look at that in terms of days, typically around 7 to 10 days is when everything resolves back to normal. So when everybody wonders where did Florida High School Association come up with this 6-7 day return to play protocol, where'd that come from? This is a key basis of it, okay? There's some other more gruesome studies done in dogs that I won't talk about, but they also show the same thing. Okay? These are older studies. There was a study that just came out a few weeks ago where they did it all again because folks are questioning. There's folks out there who want to say, hey, we should get these guys back 2 or 3 days, not a week. Well, they just did some new studies, reproving that the brain hasn't changed any over the last 15 years. It still takes a little bit of time for all those chemicals to re-equilibrate after injury. They're doing scans now, looking at this. This is a head MRI scan where they're looking at this and showing some issues with how glucose and other chemicals are taken up in the brain after injury. This isn't a specific case, just an example of what's being done out there some places to try to research this. So we get the things that you guys kind of care about and matter day to day. What do you do immediately after injury? So if you have an athlete that's injured, I think everybody knows they need to come out, right? Whether it's practice or competition, they're done for the day. That standard was set 10 years ago now, and remains the standard pretty much at every level of athletic participation, at least in the U.S. If you have an athletic trainer on the sideline, that's your first resource. Get that person involved. That's what they're there for, have an assessment. If you don't have that, then give them to a medical provider who's got experience taking care of concussions. Red flag signs and symptoms. So what are red flags of a worse head injury that we got to be aware about? So they lose consciousness and they don't quickly regain that consciousness. They're awake. They're walking around. They seem to be normal, and then they collapse. Okay? I know at least 4 athletes in communities where I've lived have collapsed and died from head injuries. Okay? I know multiple physicians who are close friends of mine who stood and watched an athlete die on the sideline that they were trying to take care of from a head injury. So it happens and it's real. So those are sort of some of the big symptoms to be aware of. Remember, and this is a part that challenges folks and they have a hard time accepting, is concussion symptoms do not always present immediately after the injury. It can be the next day, it can be 2 days later. It's living the last 10 years living in college athletics. I had 500 athletes that I knew really well, and 120 football players I knew very, very well. And we'd see every one of those guys after a game, and we'd look at them. And it was more than one time I saw a guy after a game, and he looked stone cold normal, looked fine. He came in the next day, he's glassy-eyed, he's just not right. Okay? They do not always present acutely right there on the spot, and that's hard to accept for folks, but it's reality, okay? One university did a study where they looked at all their concussed football players. They didn't publish this, but they did a study where they looked at all their concussed football players, and in about 20% of cases, they could not identify the hit. These were practice injuries. They could not identify the hit in practice where the injury occurred. So what's the point of that? Many of the hits that cause concussion injuries are innocuous. They don't come up on our radar of attention. So we have to just be mindful of what the athlete's reporting and what they're describing to us in those situations. You probably have seen this, maybe you have, maybe you haven't, but it's called the SCAT-3 form. It's a sideline assessment tool. It's been around in various versions for a decade or so now. It's about a 4-page document. This is just the first page of it. But it's a tool you can use on the sideline, evaluating an athlete. It's particularly helpful if you have baseline data already on file on the athlete, so you can compare pre and post injury. So it's a nice tool for just doing an initial assessment there when you're suspicious. So what happens when an athlete ends up in my office or another healthcare provider's office and we suspect they have a concussion possible? First thing I want to do is understand the mechanism of injury, how they get injured. So I ask the athlete how it happened. I ask mom or dad who was in the stands how it happened. If we can get a report from a coach or another athlete, that's very helpful. You want to look at their symptoms after that injury, okay? And often your athlete's not aware of how they're different. So mom and dad's perception, coach's perception. Many times these days it's a teammate who's noticed the issue and got someone involved to help out with that athlete's care. Physical exam is an important part of what we do. We're looking a lot these days for issues with balance, issues with visual function, issues with how the eyes move, and we're also looking at problems with the neck, because we know that all those conditions can be treated, and all those conditions, if treated, can help us get these athletes feeling better quicker. And then neurocognitive testing. I wasn't here earlier in the morning, but I understand you guys talked some about baseline testing possibly here in athletes. And so the baseline testing is something we do to look at neurocognitive functions, so brain function, ability to think and concentrate. That's a valuable tool when we're deciding if the athlete is ready to go back to participation. So have they fully recovered? Are they back to their baseline level of brain function? So another factor to be aware of, especially as a coach, when you've got athletes and you're wondering why is this athlete still out, you can go ahead and sort of prepare yourself by knowing in advance what are some modifying factors, what are some things that we know tend to foretell that an athlete's going to take longer to recover. Female athletes in general recover slower than male athletes. If athletes who have a prior history of concussion, particularly in the last 6 to 12 months, tend to recover more slowly, have symptoms for longer. Athletes who have depression, anxiety, other mental health conditions tend to heal and recover slower. Athletes with a history of migraine or significant headache issues, and then athletes with learning disorders, particularly ADD and ADHD. All those athletes, on average, recover more slowly than their peers who do not have those associated conditions. And then how do we take care of these athletes? Well, we all know that like your athletes are told they can't come, they can't practice, they can't work out, they got to rest. You know, this is really changing over the last 5 or 6 years. Years ago, it was put them in a dark room, turn off the lights, turn off the TV. Well, that's gone now. One coach out there in Texas who put somebody in the shed, I think kind of really brought that to light. I'm sure those who remember that. So fortunately, we're not doing that too much anymore. But these days we talk about activity modification. So this is challenging because this requires a lot of communication back and forth with your athlete. But we talk about activity modification. So what do we tell the athlete? You can do things that don't bother you and don't exacerbate your symptoms. Now, does that mean that day 2 after injury we're going to put them back out on the football field? No. But we might let them get on the bike, or we might let them jog some, or get on their video games or text message or whatever. So things that don't exacerbate their symptoms. Now, that's important for a couple of reasons. One, we're stimulating brain function in good ways. Probably most importantly, we're keeping them happy, because as soon as you start taking away everything from an athlete, or any of us for that matter, we start getting down, we start getting depressed, that starts impacting our ability to feel better and recover. We start feeling disconnected from our teammates and the sport that we love or whatnot as an athlete, right? So modifying activities instead of just saying all activities are off limits. Academic modification. I can tell you, coming to this level where I'm seeing a lot of high school athletes, this part's challenging for me as a physician. When I was in a collegiate setting, I had all these advisors and other folks, disabilities office and all kinds of folks who would sort of take this and run with it. And I just sort of say, make sure that the class is going okay, let me know if you have any issues. The high school level is really challenging. Really requires coaches, administrators, teachers, athletic trainers, medical providers really collaborating together to kind of formulate plans around academic modifications, because it's a real problem. If you don't give these kids time to sort of recover, they're going to be many times challenged in class. All of you have those athletes who are type A on the field and in the classroom, and those kids struggle when they're told, hey, you're going to get behind in school because you need to take a little time off. All of you have at least one teacher in your school who's a challenging, who says, no, I'm not going to give you time off or a break from taking this test, right? And I know it happens because I see athletes every single week who say they've been back and mom and the kid have talked to the teacher and they say, no, you got to do it now. It takes collaborating, it takes pulling together and recognizing this is an effort to get this athlete better. Some of you, most of you are probably familiar, but if you're not, physical therapy has become a much more utilized tool in the care of concussed athletes. Many athletes, as I mentioned earlier, have problems with balance, problems with vision, and we can now assess that in the physician exam room, and then we can get that treated working with our physical therapist. At the same time, as I mentioned earlier, neck injuries, neck spasms, sore neck, those types of things are also now very much recognized as a contributing factor to concussion symptoms. And if we don't get that better, the concussion symptoms don't get better. So we're using physical therapy a lot more in the care of concussed athletes. I put medication down here with question marks. There are instances where you'll have athletes who are put on medications. And there's one thing that those 40-some physician statements agree on that I mentioned earlier. That athlete needs to be off all those medicines and feeling well before they go back to sports. The other piece you have to be mindful of is for most of you, you're taking care of athletes who are teenagers or younger, and many of the medications we talk about using have risk that you got to be very cognizant of in this population. And so you got to be very judicious in considering medication treatment for athletes with concussion. So talk about management of concussion. Got two categories really for our athletes. We've got return to learn and return to play. What I tell athletes is if you can't handle it in the classroom because of your concussion, then you can't be on the field or on the court, okay? kind of accepted standards that many abide by is when you can sit in class or you can sit and read or what have you for 30 minutes consecutively without causing concussion symptoms, then you can return to the classroom. And then you need to be able to take a 15-minute break every 30 to 45 minutes. Those are considered standards of care. As I mentioned earlier, a collaborating team of professionals on the school side as well as the medical side is really critical to this. Return to play. You gotta be symptom-free at rest. You gotta be symptom-free in the classroom. You gotta be symptom-free with activity. You gotta be off of medications that were utilized to help you feel better. You gotta be off of those. Standing medications you take routinely, that's fine. But anything you're using for pain, headaches, mood, those kind of things, you need to be off of those. That progression that you're all familiar with, that 6-day progression that we have, you gotta be asymptomatic through all those stages. And then we return to play progression modifications. So you guys saw the slide earlier. We talked about why we have that 6-day return to play. That 6-day return to play is the bare minimum. The standards and the recommendations out there by all those organizations I mentioned earlier is that you modify that plan based on the circumstances of your athlete. So the athlete who's had multiple concussions needs to have a longer return to play plan. The athlete who's had symptoms for 4 weeks, well, they're suddenly well on Monday, they're not going to be ready to go on Saturday, okay, or Friday, or what have you. You have to modify those based on that, and that's considered standard quality practice for concussion care. This form we've mentioned, you guys are very familiar with it. And then there's my references. Thanks for your time. Any questions, I'm happy to take those.
Couple of things. First of all, academic accommodations after concussion, absolutely, we're going to do that. So I will be coordinating with our curriculum department. That's important. So I'll make sure I contact Mr. Chambers and we'll make sure we can do that. The AEDs, coordinate with your trainers. And by all means, you can take that from the field house, bring it onto the field. We just have to make sure it gets back into the case so that it can recharge. So, last thing you want is an AED that's not charged. So we got to make sure that someone has accountability to take it to the field or the court and get it back. I think that's important because the time, the slides that we saw, minutes lost is not something we want to do. So coordinate that in each of your schools. I think every cross-country and football program should have a kiddie pool ready to immerse those kids at practice somewhere in the shade. I mean, those things should be there just in case. You can't get the kid back. If we lose one, you can't get him back. And then the last thing is, in talking with representatives from Andrews, they were saying that proper helmet fit was a great way to reduce concussions and reduce injuries. So football coaches, your helmet reps can come out and train whoever's, wiggling the face mask, oh, you're good. Whoever's doing that and fitting them, the helmet reps can help you out with training. So that's it. Y'all have a great day.